Ever get that like late night brain itch when you're, wiping down the counters or something and suddenly you're like, wait, what's it all about?
Yeah, the existential dread sets in.
Exactly. And especially after a day of, trying to make a difference in the world, it can really hit you.
Mm. It's a common thread, that's for sure.
So that's the energy we're tapping into with today's deep dive.
Yeah.
This piece called SisiKa. Yeah, with a K. We'll get to that.
Catchy.
Right. It's by this Argentine political strategist, Enrique Aurelli. You familiar with his work at all?
Definitely. His writing always strikes me as very conversational, Like he's right there with you, wrestling with these big questions.
Totally. And he doesn't shy away from the tough stuff either. Like right out of the gate in SisiKa, he's asking, do our efforts even matter? Will anyone remember any of this a century from now? It's kind of refreshing, actually, to see that vulnerability.
Absolutely. And I think that's where he brilliantly brings in Albert Camus and the whole idea of the absurd.
Okay, but before everyone tunes out thinking this is all gloom and doom.
Right, not at all.
Remind us, what is the absurd? Because it's not just saying life is meaningless, give up.
Exactly. Camus wasn't saying life is meaningless, but rather that the universe doesn't inherently have meaning that we can just grasp onto. It's that clash between our very human desire to find meaning and the universe just kind of existing.
Like the universe is this giant shrug emoji, totally indifferent. Perfectly put. Which is kind of absurd when you think about it. And to really hammer this home, Aurelli uses this really clever storytelling approach. He brings up the myth of Sisyphus.
Classic example.
Right, but he doesn't just mention it, he goes deep.
It's one of those stories everyone kind of knows, but Aurelli uses it to explore ambition, punishment, that kind of struggle we all face.
So, for those who need a refresher.
Sisyphus was a king who, well, he annoyed the gods. Let's just say he got a tad too clever for his own good. His punishment. Eternally pushing a boulder up a mountain, only for it to roll back down every single time.
Talk about a metaphor for the daily grind, right?
Right.
But here's where Aureli's take gets really interesting. He directly connects Sisyphus's eternal struggle to the very real struggles of political activism. Like, we're constantly pushing for change, hitting roadblocks, setbacks. It's easy to feel like we're stuck in our own Sisyphean loop. And it makes you wonder, what's the point of all this effort? And Aureli, he's drawing on Camus here, right? He lays out these different ways we tend to react when we bump up against that feeling of what's the point. So like, option one, what he calls suicide.
Heavy.
Right. But he's not just talking about, like, ending it all, right? It's more that feeling of giving up, checking out.
Mentally, emotionally.
Yeah, exactly. Or option two, we go the other way. Embrace a leap of faith.
Sure, convince ourselves there's a bigger plan, even if we can't see it. Comforting, in a way.
Totally. But as Aureli points out, both of those can feel like ways to avoid actually dealing with the absurdity head on. And this is something I really appreciate about his writing. He doesn't just leave it as this abstract idea, He grounds it in these examples of how that absurdity actually feels in our lives.
Oh, absolutely. Like he talks about that feeling of being a cog in a machine, that disillusionment of the worker stuck in this soul-crushing routine.
Oh, yeah. Makes you think of that Camus quote, something like, you hit 30 and realize it takes an hour to get to work and back, and you'll be doing that for 30 more years.
Ooh.
Like that sudden awareness of time, whether we're finding meaning in it or not.
It's a lot.
It is. And Aureli contrasts that with this other figure, the Don Juan, the one who's like constantly chasing new experiences, distractions, almost to avoid the bigger picture.
Another form of avoidance, right.
Exactly. But even then, Aureli argues there's a certain hollowness to it. Another way of not really engaging with the question of meaning, just chasing that temporary fix.
It's like applying a Band-Aid to an existential wound.
Right. So we're not talking blind optimism here.
Yeah.
And it's not about giving up either. And this is where I think Aureli's view takes a really interesting turn, because he finds this, unexpected optimism in acknowledging the absurdity. Not explaining it away, but acknowledging it.
Yes. And that's key. It's not passive acceptance. It's more like active confrontation. He even uses this phrase, an addiction to oxymoron.
Okay, full disclosure, that went through me for a second. What'd you make of that?
Well, it sounds like he's saying we need to embrace the contradiction, hold the absurdity and the possibility of meaning in our minds at the same time.
Right, like it's okay to feel those two things at once.
Exactly. Life is inherently paradoxical. It can be meaningless and deeply meaningful all at once.
Simultaneously.
And it's in that tension, that space, that we can find a way forward.
So just to recap, we're not talking about throwing in the towel and resigning ourselves to a meaningless existence,
Not
right?
at all. It's more about leaning into that tension, questioning, even rebelling against the absurdity we perceive.
Okay, so rebellion then. That's interesting. In
And
what way?
Aurelli argues that it's precisely this act of rebellion, this refusal to simply accept the status quo, that infuses life with value and meaning. It's about mustering the courage to fight for our beliefs, even when the odds seem stacked against us.
And that really resonates with the essence of political activism, wouldn't you say? Challenging the established norms, advocating for change despite the uphill battle.
Without a doubt. And this organically leads us to Aureli's subsequent point: passion. If we accept the premise that nothing inherently holds meaning, we are essentially liberated to determine what truly matters to us and pursue it with unwavering zeal.
It's like that inner fire that fuels us, even when fatigue and frustration threaten to extinguish it.
Precisely. Aureli even posits that Sisyphus himself, in those fleeting moments when he reaches the summit, must experience a surge of accomplishment, despite knowing the boulder's inevitable descent.
It's a powerful image, isn't it? It reminds me of that climate rally I attended last week. It felt like an embodiment of Sisyphus's struggle. Yet, in those instances of shared purpose, collective energy, and solidarity, we discover the inherent worthiness of his struggle.
Exactly. It's about recognizing the meaning woven into the journey itself, celebrating those small victories, those moments of shared purpose that make the effort worthwhile. And finally, Aureli brings us to the concept of freedom. He proposes that by embracing the absurd, we paradoxically attain a level of freedom we've never known.
Because we're liberated from the relentless pursuit of some preordained meaning, right? We're
Right.
empowered to define our own.
Precisely. We're no longer bound by societal expectations or the weight of some grand universal purpose. We have the autonomy to decide what holds significance for us, what we're willing to fight for, and how we choose to navigate this life.
So as we conclude this deep dive into Aureli's SisiKa, what insights can we glean for those of us who, as he puts it, embrace the militant life?
I believe Aureli's message is this. Perhaps it's not about striving for some unattainable utopia, a world devoid of struggle or hardship. Perhaps it's about finding meaning in the shared struggle itself, in the collective pursuit of a more just and equitable world.
Embracing this struggle, like Sisyphus, not because victory is guaranteed, but because the act of pushing forward, of fighting for our convictions, is what imbues our lives with meaning.
And maybe, just maybe, that realization is enough.
It's a powerful thought to sit with. And on that note, we'll leave you with this. Where in your own life do you encounter this delicate dance between meaning and absurdity? What causes, what passions ignite that fire within you, urging you to embrace the struggle?